In today's video we're gonna talk about radio altimeter. We're gonna first see what a radio altimeter is, how does it work, and then at the end of this video I'm gonna give you some practical example where we're gonna jump into a Boeing 737 simulator and I will show you what are the indications of the pilots, okay? So without further ado, let's jump into the topic. Hi there, I'm Gabriele from PILOTCLIMB.com. I'm a training captain on the Boeing 737, and if you're trying to become a better pilot or get your head around aviation, this is the right channel for you. Consider subscribe so you will not miss the next video. Before starting, please leave in the comment below. If you have any questions throughout the video, just leave a comment below and then I will answer you out. For me, it's extremely important that you get 100% of today's topic, the radio altimeters. In order to understand in full the radio altimeter, we need first talk about the differences between a barometric altimeter and a radio altimeter. The barometric altimeter is an altimeter that works with the pressure, so the aircraft will feel the pressure around itself and you set a reference, okay? So the aircraft can actually calculate the difference between the pressure that is around the aircraft and the reference that you set on the altimeter. This pressure actually is gonna give you the altitude, okay? The height or the flight level depending on the pressure reference that you are using. I made a separate video about these pressure references. Go there and watch, I will link them in the description below. The radio altimeter, however, gives you the height over the ground that you've got at that moment, because the radio altimeter doesn't use the pressure but it uses the signals, the waves that the radio altimeter sends. Each radio altimeter, each aircraft has got two antennas, okay, one transmitter and one receiver. So what the aircraft does actually when it's flying, it sends a signal that goes all the way down to the terrain, come back, and then the radio altimeters, with this movement of the signal that goes down to the ground and then come back, can calculate what's your actual height over the ground at that specific moment, okay? How does this radio altimeter calculate that? Is quite straightforward, because the radio altimeter knows that that signal has got a certain speed and it knows how much time is elapsed from the moment it sent the signal and then it came back, okay? So if it knows the speed and knows the time, it can get the distance, and that distance is actually your height, okay? The first thing that we need to understand is that since the radio altimeter gives you the height over the ground at that moment, it might vary, okay? Let's say you are descending over a mountain, so what will happen is that the radio altimeter here will give you the height over the mountain, but then once you pass the mountain, it will actually give you a higher height. So don't be scared if that happens, okay? Now let's jump into the whiteboard and I will make you a few examples. I will show you a few examples in order to make sure that you get this topic 100%. Alright, so looking at the whiteboard here, I draw two aircraft, okay, the aircraft number 1 and aircraft number 2, and my goal with this whiteboard is to show you the difference between the altitude, the barometric altitude and the radio altitude, okay? The barometric altitude is the altitude that you get when in your altimeter you set the QNH, okay, so the pressure at the mean sea level. That's your barometric altitude, so from the aircraft all the way down to the MSL, mean sea level. But the radio altitude is the altitude that you've got from your aircraft to the terrain, okay, the height, more correct, okay. As you can see in the aircraft number 2, this is the radio altitude, okay, the altitude indicated by the radio altimeters. Better call it radio 8 because actually it's an 8 from the terrain, and the barometric altitude didn't change, okay, because in the second example the barometric altitude is still the same. As you can see, the aircraft number 1 is gonna have the radio altitude, which is quite reduced, okay, is not that big. However, the radio altitude number 2 is actually bigger. So as you can see, depending on the terrain that is underneath your aircraft, your radio altitude change. However, the barometric altitude doesn't, because the QNH is always a fixed pressure reference that you use when you fly in altitude. It is extremely important to understand that the radio altimeter works below 2,500 feet. So whenever you are below 2,500 feet, the radio altimeter will start to work and the pilots will start to have indications about the radio altitude, okay? So as you can see in here, on the right side, there is a primary flight display of a Boeing 737, and this box here actually tells you what is your radio altitude. As you can see, in this case, we've got 2,280 feet radio altitude, but the barometric altitude is 2,370 feet. Alright, so as you can see, there is in this case 100 feet of difference, because you've got a ground that is 100 feet, the elevation is 100 feet, okay? But sometimes you can see a big discrepancy between the radio altimeter and the barometric altimeter. But what are the implications and why do we have this radio altimeter? First of all, the radio altimeter is extremely important when you are flying close to the terrain. As a professional pilot, any time that the radio altimeter starts to work, I always ask myself, do I really know where the terrain is? Because the radio altimeter that we've got on board of the Boeing 737, as soon as it starts working, so as soon as we have the terrain that is at 2,500 feet below us or even closer, the radio altimeter will actually tell us 2,500. Okay, there is this automatic voice that I will show you in a second in the simulator how does it work, that actually warn you that you've got terrain, close terrain. Okay, anytime I hear this, I always ask myself, where is the terrain? I'm aware of the terrain that is around me. Okay, fantastic. The second thing is that whenever you've got a low visibility and you need to perform a low visibility approach and auto land, the radio altimeter is used by the autopilot and the systems of the aircraft in order to perform the approach and the auto land, okay? Because the auto land system is actually basing the information on the radio altimeter. So my question is, how does the autopilot know when to start the flare, when to retard the throttle, when to do all the landing maneuvers that as a pilot we do every day? It is basing his information, of course, on the speeds, on the pressure and everything and so on, but most importantly on the radio altimeters, because the radio altimeters will actually tell the autopilot how close is from the runway or from the terrain and so on, okay? The radio altimeter gives us a lot of altitude readouts throughout the approach that basically is informing us that the terrain is, for example, 400 feet below us, 300 feet below us, 200 feet below us and so on. So, as you can imagine, on board of a sophisticated aircraft, normally you've got two radio altimeters, one radio altimeter on the captain's side and one radio altimeter on the first officer's side, which is not a big deal if one or both fails in case there is a good weather. However, in case of low visibility, as you can imagine already, you need to have both radio altimeter working, okay? There are some situations in which the radio altimeter callouts doesn't work, okay? When that happens, no panic, okay? If the radio altimeter is still working, one of the two pilots that is in front can actually read to the other guy the radio altitudes, okay? So one guy is flying, it's called pilot flying, the other guy is actually assisting the pilot flying, it's called pilot monitoring, will read the radio altitude that he reads on the PFD of the aircraft, okay? So, fantastic. Now, let's go into the simulator and I will show you what are these callouts that the actual radio altimeter and the system of the aircraft provides to the pilots. You will see that the aircraft actually tell the pilot 400, 300, 200 and so on, and then on the last 50 feet of the approach, okay, when the aircraft is actually 50 feet above the runway, we'll start calling H10 feet, so it's gonna be 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. This 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 is very useful when you're doing when you are doing your landing, because it really helps you out on the flare, okay? On the Boeing 737, normally between 30 and 20 you start to pitch up a little bit, at 20 you close the thrust and then you hold the positive attitude and then you wait for the aircraft to touch the ground. So without further explanation, let's go in the simulator and I'll show you what I mean.
300.
Checked.
200.
Checked.
100.
Checked.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Alright, thank you very much for watching this video. If you like the video, give it a like and consider subscribe. I'm gonna make a lot of videos about these topics and pilot training. So go as well in PILOTCLIMB.com where you can subscribe for free pilot training content. Remember, if you have any question, leave in the comment below and I will help you out. And I'll see you in the next one.